Hey there, Mike Dunn with Gamingtrend, and we're here at Origins Game Fair at our booth on Sunday. It's towards the end of the day, so I'm gassing out a little bit here, so you'll bear with me. But I do have Danielle from Cephalofair
Hi.
here to talk to us about something I'm very excited about, which is the Gloomhaven RPG.
Yes.
And we haven't heard too much about this, and I'm hoping we can pick your brain a little bit
Sure, yeah.
and get some juicy details.
I can try to give you some juice. I also have been a full conventions and Sundays, so there might
Yes.
not be a whole lot of squeeze left in me. So, yeah, what do you want to know?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't. I think the last time we talked, we just kind of like really kind of talked basics.
We did, yeah. So, gosh, and things have changed since then. Like it was PAX Unplugged, I think we talked.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute. So around March, we kind of hit on a new mechanic where essentially we've been kind of hitting our heads against combat mechanics. How do we make it feel tactical and like Gloomhaven without making it feel like you're just playing the board game,
Right.
right? Like it's the balance we were trying to hit. And, you know, we had, you still had your hand of cards and you still had the, pick two, but one of the things that we were running into was that combat never felt challenging and it never felt like it mattered what your choices were because you had your full, 11, 12 card hand and you would play two, you'd play two, you'd play two, you'd bring them back and it just didn't really matter what you played. If you lost a card, didn't really matter. Might as well just use your biggest things right up front because combat would end after 5 or 6 rounds, and then you no chance of exhausting yourself from card overuse. And so
And that kind of stands in the face of in the board game, the tension is very high
right,
with those cards,
exactly.
right? So
Yeah,
yeah, no, that
so
makes sense.
so we were running into that and we were like, well, the way to handle this, what do we do? How do we handle this? And so we started talking about it and we kind of just sat down and I was like, you know what? We reduce the number of cards you have. We make the cards that you do have more impactful on an average, but there's a lot more. I need to make hard decisions here because I'm going to run out of cards.
Right.
But then we also have a little bit of, well, your basic, attack and move can't just always be attack and move because if you do run out of cards, just being like move two, attack two is really boring.
Right.
So we decided we were going to have like essentially some kind of class specific basic actions that you could always do, always available. So you use it, comes back, use it, comes
Right.
back.
Right.
But then we'd have 6 other cards and that's it. That's your hand for the whole combat. There's no
Oh, wow.
refreshing them.
Wow. And so then when you're done, you're exhausted.
When you're done, if you run out of cards, you still have those 2 basics.
Still basics. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you run out of your specials, you've still got your basics. So you can continue, and those basics are class specific, so they still capture some of the basic things that your class should be able to do at all times.
Just at a fairly low level.
But at a fairly low level, right? So, so maybe it's a generate or a use of an element or a generate of an element, or it's it's a hit and or it's a shield, or for some of your more tanky characters. So it is based on the class, and it's kind of something to kind of capture what the class is about. So they're always capable of doing kind of their signature thing at a little bit of a lower level. But then you want to, like, okay, it's fine for me to just do this basic thing, but if I really want to get some extra oomph, then I'm going to try to use my special cards that are going to get discarded or lost.
Gotcha.
And then at the end of combat, everything you discarded comes back.
Ah, okay.
And now, but everything you lost still needs to wait for a long rest.
Okay. Very nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Man. So I always imagined that when y'all were starting on this, that you were using obviously the board game and the mechanics of the board game as like a starting point.
Yes.
And it sounds like as you start to work through it, that things are starting to diverge a little bit more here and there.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot to be said for, Gloomhaven itself and the Havens are a good game that encaptures kind of this really strategic element and this kind of puzzle game activity in a story driven world. So I have often heard people say, "Oh, it's like D&D, but it's a board game," right? "Oh,
Right.
it's like a role playing game, but it's a board game." Like, okay, yeah, it is like that, but it's a board game, but it's absolutely a board game.
Right.
So taking Yay!
It's the Extra Life booth. It's
Yeah, they're very excited over there.
it's all good. They're
Yeah.
probably giving something away.
Probably. And then the train of thought, but changing a board game into an RPG, like, oh, this is like a board game, but it's an RPG. Nobody is excited about that.
Right. Right. Right.
Right? Nobody's excited to hear, oh, but this is just like a board game, but instead it's an RPG. It's like, why aren't we just playing a board game? So we need it to feel like an RPG, and Gloomhaven has so much lore and story and cool like setting elements that we want players to be able to explore, and we don't want the mechanics to get in the way of that. And so we needed the mechanics to both marry the idea of what it is you're supposed to be doing in the game. You're, just like in the board game, you're mercenaries, you're going out and you're doing missions, but we wanted people to be able to feel like the missions could go in any way, in any direction. And the tactics aren't in the figuring out the mission puzzle in the correct way so that you can get it done with the number of cards you have available, but instead in coming up with clever ways to solve a problem.
Right.
Or coming up with interesting ways to have your character do something that is fun and dynamic and makes sense for the situation and is not confined by, well, all I really have available to me are these cards in front of me.
Right. Right.
So we also pulled out movement is now no longer constricted by cards. Your cards do have
sense.
Movement attached to them sometimes, but you always have the ability to move on your turn as like a free action that you can move a little bit, and then you can sacrifice a bottom or a top action to move some more.
Makes sense.
And then some of your bottom actions or top actions have a little bit of move attached to it.
Nice.
So depending on the character type, there may be more movement.
Like you can move and then you play a card and it's like an attack and then maybe a retreat.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot more positioning, moving in, moving back out, just being able to kind of move around the battlefield and do things that make sense more for an RPG than they do for this is a puzzle. And we need to constrict movement. We need to constrict how you talk to each other and what you're talking about and how you determine, like, what are we doing for this round and things like that. So now it's kind of more, you are still doing a little bit of tactics, a little bit of strategy, but you're planning together 100% like transparency. Like, I'm going to go on initiative 15, which is not a thing you do in the board game. In fact, doing the demos earlier this week, I was like, okay, you're going to do a planning phase where you all get to decide what you're going to do, and you should talk to each other so that you don't step on each other's toes, and you know what this person's going to attack that guy, and either he may do enough damage to kill him, so you shouldn't be planning to attack that guy. You should be planning to do something else, and tell each other how fast you're going and things like that. And so they start saying like, oh, I'm going to go really fast. I was like, tell them the number. Yeah. And they're like, oh my goodness, I'm not used to this. And I'm like, I get it. You don't need to make this any harder on yourself because I'm listening to you, and I am going to make the monsters make decisions based on what I'm hearing and what's best in the tactical moment, not necessarily, they're not running on a script.
Right.
And there are some people who have played Gloomhaven a whole lot, where I would have, oh, the archers are attacking. I'm like, okay, well, they're going to attack you and drop a trap here. And then this guy's just going to attack you and do extra damage. This guy's going to do a different thing. And they're like, it was really interesting to see that the bad guys were doing different actions from each other.
Yeah.
And not just following a script.
That's right. Because they're always doing the same thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. So like you were talking about, people's perception of Gloomhaven.
Right.
My perception of Gloomhaven, being an old school D&D player,
Sure.
is that it kind of like D&D in particular has gone from a like more of a random dungeon crawler experience
Right.
to now like more of like a narrative experience,
Right.
right? And I feel like in some ways what you're doing with the TTRPG is realizing that kind of dungeon crawler experience and that early D&D feel a little bit more, while also including
The
more of
more,
that narrative
yeah,
play
yeah,
style.
absolutely. And so, we have a lot of, stuff written now for the game. Like, it's completely written, which
Nice.
it was not when we talked.
Right, right.
Yeah, so now it's completely written and it's moving into editing. And so I'm just tweaking some things as I send chapters off to editing. And we're pretty much like, I have to write an introduction and then we're pretty much done. So, like, we're getting there. But
Nice.
it is interesting, as one of the things that I feel like we struggled with was, how do we introduce new people, either people who have never played an RPG before, people who are new to Gloomhaven, to some of the best things about Gloomhaven, such as the players having the ability to make choices that impact the story
Right.
in such large ways,
Right.
right? In the Gloomhaven, you do these branching storylines, and there's just going to be missions and scenarios that you never see.
Yeah.
Unless you just decide to go back and play them through for the
Yeah.
fun of it.
Or you cheat.
Yeah, or you just do both of them. I mean, like, nobody's
Yeah.
going to come to your house and take your game away.
Exactly. The Cephalofair police
Yeah,
will not be at your door.
The Gloom police will.
Oh, yes, that's fair. So watch out.
Yeah, watch out. The little vermlings come in the middle of the night and steal your socks. So,
That's where they went.
yeah, that's what you get for cheating at Gloomhaven. Yeah, but in this case, we have to think about, okay, well, that ability to impact the story and impact what's going on, when you're running a dungeon crawler style game, the people make decisions on which rooms they go into or whatever.
Right.
And when you're running a lot of games, you kind of have like a storyline in your head, right? Like, this is the bad guy and the villain, this is what they're doing. And you kind of think, what are they doing off screen while the players are, looking and whatever. But you don't necessarily plan for every weird thing that the players may decide to do. So how do you, and it's hard to plan for every weird thing that the players are going to decide to do.
Right.
So how do you make sure that the players,
It's impossible to.
it sure is. So knowing that you can't plan for everything, but wanting to make sure that the players' actions have an impact, right? That
Right.
if you wind up killing a named character, that there may be a consequence of that from their faction, may decide to put a hit out on you. And that was maybe something you didn't plan for, but it happened. So how do so we have a really robust kind of just GMing chapter that says, okay, here are the ways.
Alexander E. Nelson.
Start from what? What were you?
Please return.
My brain is short circuiting. Well, back up just a little bit. Start over from that.
Yeah. Where was I? Yeah. So it's hard to plan for what the players are going to do.
Right.
And even if you do plan for some of it, they may not do anything that you plan for. So you really shouldn't plan too much.
Right.
Because they're only going to do one thing, but you don't necessarily know what that thing is going to be. And you could kind of think of some consequences for certain actions on a pretty high level.
Right.
But we give a lot. The GMing chapter has a lot of, these are the core conceits of Gloomhaven, the game. Here are the core concepts and themes that you should be playing off of. And then here are ways to maybe just flesh out your characters and their goals and what it would take for them to either attack the player characters, help the mercenaries if they're villains, change essentially from bad to good. Because in Gloomhaven, bad and good are really relative.
Right.
Right? It's really your goals against other people's goals.
Right.
And in some cases, there's some pretty sinister stuff going on. But, depending on how your mercenaries feel about it, they may not care.
Fact is, they are mercenaries.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, we have to talk about how do you make sure you plan for all that kind of stuff, and how do you run a game that looks like Gloomhaven and feels like Gloomhaven without putting people on a rail system or pre-planning for literally every possibility of action.
Right.
So it's hard. It
Oh yeah.
really is.
I bet. I bet. Are there any aspects, I guess, in translating from the board game into an RPG? Not that this is necessarily a translation, but there is definitely some connectivity.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thematically and mechanically. Like, obviously, the first thing that has come to mind is the card-based combat system instead
Yes.
of using dice.
Yes.
Is there anything in particular that you've kind of brought over from the board game experience into the RPG experience that maybe wasn't part of like the original plan, or has kind of worked out surprisingly well?
So originally, when I first came onto the project, Isaac already kind of had a basic, like, we're just going to use the modifier cards, and we're going
Right.
to add like a little number onto the bottom, and that's going to work for attributes, and then the center is going to work for attack, and then we're just going to do that.
Right.
And I spent a long time trying to figure out, well, either how do we just make sure that all the attributes use the center number for the
Right.
modifier card, so we don't need two numbers on the cards, or how do we turn everything into like a 2d6 roll or something like that?
Right.
And neither of those were satisfactory.
Interesting.
And I attempted both of those things, but neither were very satisfactory. And so I just left that the way it was. And the more we do it, the more it's pretty intuitive. We just tell people like this bigger number, that's for your attribute. The smaller, like minus plus number, is for your attack value, and people get it really quickly, and it's not hard
Right.
to conceptualize, and so it works out really well, essentially straight from the board game,
Right.
with just this one little number added to it. We also realized that one of the things that RPGs don't have as many components as a board game, right?
Yes.
So we wanted to use similar terminology, attack 2, move 4, blah, blah, blah. But not everybody's going to be using a hex mat. Not everybody's going to be using cards. Some people are just going to have a character sheet. They're going to have written down what their powers are.
Theater of the mind.
They're going to do everything theater of the mind. And so we need to enable that kind of play.
Yes. Yeah.
So we took all of the mechanics that would normally be, translated them into plain text that you would see in an RPG, using feet instead of hex spaces, with the designation that 5 feet is 1 hex space.
Right.
Right. And so, now it's, make a line attack out to 15 feet.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And things like that. So we did some translations. So the mechanics functionally work exactly the same, but they have been translated to a more RPG savvy language. But then we do still have play cards available as a play aid.
Right.
And honestly, using them as a play aid makes combat and everything go so fast.
Right.
Because people aren't looking up, what does my power do?
Right.
They're not, oh, what am I going to do that round? And the other thing is kind of planning everything out before the rounds start instead of choosing on your turn is really good, because everybody kind of has to look at the scene, know what's going on, make a decision of what they're going to do, and then kind of pay attention throughout until their turn, because things might have changed from what you were going to do to what you're going to do now. And if they have, you still have just these, not exactly just these 2 cards,
Right.
but a much more limited set of things you could do than if you have I have everything.
Please return your library page to the board game library and make sure to use that. Thanks.
Okay.
How often does that happen?
It's a little bit towards the end.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
End of the day.
Oh, you know what I was saying. I don't know what I was saying.
Okay. All right. So I'll just go to my question.
Okay.
So I imagine that that even though you're trying to help facilitate theater of the mind,
Yes.
that you were saying that having those player aids does
Makes
help
things a little
help
faster.
smooth
Yeah.
things over. I imagine that there's even some aspect of if you're playing the TTRPG and you own a copy of Gloomhaven, that there are things from the box that you could also use to kind of help facilitate the TTRPG.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking more obviously not the things like the cards, so per se.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more like you could use the hex tiles, you
can
could use the
absolutely-
miniatures.
Yeah, hex tiles, miniatures, the condition markers,
Yeah,
health markers,
yeah.
all of that can kind of help you facilitate any theater of the mind stuff if you already own the box, like any of the Gloomhaven, Frosthaven.
Yeah.
I mean, even you could use the Jaws of the Lion maps and repurpose them.
Right.
And I know, like, there's a bunch of third-party, like, Gloomhaven map makers
Yep.
that you can, like, throw together and then print out, like, a sheet for yourself. Like, there's a lot of accessibility if you do want to play with the cards and on a map and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Very nice, very nice. And I imagine at some point you're going to be looking at ways to maybe even possibly synergize some of that a little bit more.
Yeah, we thought about doing like a conversion at some point of how to convert your cards. The problem is that the like energy that goes into going, okay, you have a 30 card set for a class and we're going to turn that into an 18 card set.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And like, what do we toss out? How do we like compress things? How do we balance, like, what does a level 7 card look like now?
It seems like a lot of heavy lifting. Right
It is a lot of heavy lifting. It took a hot minute for us to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, very cool. It sounds like a lot's been happening since the last time we talked.
I mean, it's been what, 6 months?
Yeah,
A lot
yeah.
happens in 6 months.
A lot happens in 6 months.
Yeah.
But we will continue to follow the development of the
Yeah.
Gloomhaven RPG. Very excited to see more of it in the coming months. And when are you still guys are shoot what? Haha.
When is it coming out?
When is it coming out? Yes.
That's the question on everyone's mind. I'm still hoping that it will go to a printer by the end of this year. In fact, that is my ultimate goal, is to a printer before the holidays.
Yep. Okay.
But printing and shipping takes time.
Oh, yeah.
So once it goes out to a printer, I don't have any control over that. Beyond that, right? Like, it's all how long does a printer take to make 6,000 books and
Right.
or 10,000 books, however many thousands of books we're printing.
But it's written.
It's written.
And
It's getting edited.
it's getting proofread.
It's
and
getting
edited.
proofread and edited, and then it will go into layout probably second week of July,
Excellent.
which
Excellent.
we're already into. Like, next week starts first week of July, so like 2 weeks after that, it's probably going to go into layout. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
Well, so happy to have you back to talk.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me.
And yeah, we will continue to follow this coverage, and we will continue to bring you news about the Gloomhaven RPG as it comes. We're very excited about this, and very excited to see more maybe at Gen Con or.
Well, we'll definitely have games running at Gen Con. They're already all sold out.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to, all the GMs for that are already set. So what I'm probably going to do is have a play set available at the booth
Okay.
for folks to take a quick look at, and maybe like a really quick combat scenario. Like, we have some Frosthaven demos that we can do. So people can't get into the full game at Gen Con. You may be able to come by the booth, have a sit down, maybe play a little miniature version of it.
I think that's the next thing we need to do is get a little taste of how it plays. So
absolutely. So if you
we'll
wanna-
definitely try to get that coverage
Yep.
at Gen Con this year.
Yeah.
So that you guys can see how it actually works.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Danielle.
All right. Thank you.